So instead of reading through Chapter 7, I'm going to hit some highlights from Chapter 7, Soil Aeration and Temperature. So think about soil aeration. We're thinking about the nature of air in the soil. So what are the components of air in the soil? We know that plant roots need air. They need to have access to air in order to grow. Most plant roots. There's plant roots that don't necessarily need air from the soil. They get it from somewhere else. Like rice, for instance, can live in a fairly airless soil because it's covered with water, but it does get air from its stem in order to do respiration. So that's the breaking apart of energy and releasing, and you need oxygen in order to do that. A plant needs oxygen in order to do that, and it gives off carbon dioxide. So plant roots need that air in the soil to exist. So waterlogged soils with lots and lots of water in them, standing water for instance, don't have a lot of air in them. So we need that air to be there so roots can do the respiration. Bacteria, microorganisms, earthworms obviously don't like to have saturated soil. That's why we find them on the surface of the soil trying to get away from saturated conditions. So we have to have this aspect of ventilation in the soil in order for the plant and soil situations, particularly in crop situations other than crops like rice. We need to have that aeration happen. We need to have the exchange of gases happen into the soil. So if we don't have that exchange of gases, what happens in the soil is that the CO2 level gets very, very high because plant roots are burning energy. They need oxygen and they're burning energy and they're giving off CO2 regularly in the soil. So if you don't have that replenishment of oxygen, then you have a buildup of carbon dioxide in the soil. So we have to have that exchange. When we think about soil aeration, what we're really trying to understand is how fast are we getting penetration of something like oxygen, higher oxygen levels into the soil, and CO2 leaving the soil, and what's the makeup of soil air? If we zoomed into those pore spaces, what would we find? What's the composition air in those cases? So this is one of the big reasons why on a golf course, for instance, that experiences high compaction, high pushing out of the air spaces, we find the need to do aeration like this. And what this does for us is gives us contact space between the free air and the soil air so that things can be diffused back and forth. So we can diffuse in oxygen into the soil and diffuse out CO2 from the soil so that we get that exchange, so the oxygen left for the soil roots. Okay. So when we think about how oxygen, how that availability is regulated in the soil, there's three factors that help us understand that. First is soil macroporosity. Okay, so this is the larger pores in the soil. Do we have larger pores in the soil? If we have larger pores, are they fairly regular in the soil, or are they only places? The next thing is soil water content. The higher the soil water, the less airspace we have in the soil. So that affects obviously the air content of the soil. And then how much of the oxygen that's in the soil actually is being used by roots. So we call this oxygen consumption. O2 is oxygen is as a gas. Oxygen consumption by respiring organisms. So plant roots, microorganisms, earthworms, nematodes, all these sorts of things will breathe in oxygen in order to respire, in order to break apart energy. So the O2 consumption rate will tell us how much is available in the soil. If we have poor soil aeration, really what we're saying is we have a lack of oxygen in that root zone, that very important zone of high levels of growth, both plant growth and microbe growth. Okay. So if we have high soil water content, so let's say 80% of the pores are filled with water, or there's compaction or something like that, we will have poor aeration because it's basically that water is replacing the air in the soil in those pore space. That's when we find times of pore aeration. I have this graph here that shows you, let me change the color real quick so you can see it. I have a graph that shows the general makeup of plant roots. I love to look at plant roots because they're like upside down trees basically, and this is called fractal. If you want to look it up, Google the terms fractal and plant root, and you'll see that plant roots have a repeating pattern. That's kind of cool, but that's a rabbit trail. What we really are concerned about is this little interface right in here between the cells of a root and the air that's next to that root, or the water that's next to the root. And that interaction right there is really what we're concerned about. We want to have enough of these cells to be exposed to air, you know, and we also need them to be exposed to water too, so they can take in water. We need both. We need a good balance of both. I like to show that that cutaway of a plant root. So when we have excess moisture, when we have water standing on the soil, saturated conditions or waterlogged conditions, all those get filled up with water. And we have, again, some plants that can survive that kind of a situation, but most of our crop plants can't survive that poor soil aeration through soil saturation. So in this picture you can see the crusted nature of the soil signaling to us that at some time there has been water standing in this situation. And we need to be really aware that it doesn't take very long for plants to be, or for soil to be saturated where plants are growing, for it to have a real effect on plants. So you can see this area right in here where the plants have been stunted because of lack of access to air, right? It's not necessarily the water that's bad. It's the fact that the water pushes out the air and makes the air unavailable to plant roots that really gives a problem. When we think about different plants that can withstand more or less water, we can break them down into different categories. So these are plants that have the ability to withstand high amounts of water. So let me see over here real quick. So in this area, we've got plants that can withstand high water. So in this case, we're saying the depth of water is at 10 centimeters or less. So that's a very, very high water table. You're right. You know, you're 10 centimeters below the soil surface, and you're hitting a water table. Okay, so it's a very high water table. You can see rices here, cypress trees. We often associate those with swamp-like conditions. But then when we move over to with fairly close to the soil surface, you see that we have some species, and there's a lot of forage species in here that can do okay in that sort of situation. Okay. Once we start moving to these where we have deeper water tables, we can start growing the crops that we're familiar with. So there's corn in here, so 75 centimeters down below the surface, we can have a water table and still do fairly well with corn. Over here, wheat, there's beans, barley, oats, etc., sugar beets, those sorts of things that need a fairly dry upper soil horizon, upper soil without any water in order to grow well. We mentioned that we need to, when we aerate a soil, really what we're doing is moving more oxygen into that soil, moving carbon dioxide out of that soil. So again, remember that in the soil, things are breathing in oxygen. So microbes are breathing in oxygen. Roots are breathing in oxygen. They need oxygen in order to do the respiration and breaking apart of energy that they have to do to survive. Okay, so we need to have oxygen continually moving into that soil. What we call that process of oxygen moving into the soil is mass flow or diffusion. Okay, so diffusion of air, of oxygen into the soil air. Okay, so mass flow is one of the ways. So mass flow, and these are two different terms. We use them both in the description of how we get more or less oxygen into the soil, how we get more or less carbon dioxide into the soil. Mass flow is when soil air as a whole is forced out or in because of pressure changes in the atmosphere, because of higher winds. This can happen, and this is just basically a mass exodus of air out of the soil or into the soil because of those forces. Diffusion is probably more important because diffusion is happening all the time, and it's just like any sort of there's lots of different kinds of diffusion processes, and even you can think about as osmotic processes as well. And it's where if we have an area of air with a low concentration of oxygen and an area of air with high concentration of oxygen, the higher concentration of oxygen there will move into the lower concentration of oxygen, all things being equal. So a movement from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. This is something that we rely on in soil. So here you can see the atmosphere. So this is atmospheric air here, and in that atmospheric air, it's more oxygen than it is carbon dioxide. In the soil air, it's more. It's roughly equal, probably a little bit more oxygen than there is carbon. Actually, there is more oxygen than there is carbon dioxide. But we have this interface where we can have, and you'll see right here and here, we can have carbon dioxide move from an area of higher concentration in the soil to an area of lower concentration in the air. The same thing happens with oxygen. So oxygen can move from an area of higher concentration, that's here, to an area of lower concentration here. Okay, so that is diffusion. That's a process of diffusion. If we have really compacted soil, this doesn't happen as much. There's not as much space for this to happen. But if we aerate the soil, or if we till the soil, then this can happen really well. We can get good diffusion of oxygen into the soil, which is really what. So again, this is just talking through some of the stuff we just saw. Oxygen in the atmosphere, in the freer air, or air above the soil, is higher than in the soil. Carbon dioxide is higher in the soil than it is in the atmosphere. Water vapor, so just water as gas in the air, is higher in the soil than it is in the typically. Okay. So we have this this graph here, and this is the oxygen content of soil air before and after heavy rains in a soil in which cotton was being grown. Okay, so so before our heavy rains, that's this line here. Before the heavy rains, we have a higher percentage of oxygen in the soil. This is as we move down. So if we went down to let's say 10 centimeters, we would have 17% oxygen. If we went down a little further, we would have 15% oxygen. So 15% oxygen all the way down. Okay. After heavy rains, all of a sudden that moves far over because we're pushing and filling up the airspace now with water. So we have much less area for air to exist because water is taking up that airspace. So that helps us think about soil aeration can change fairly rapidly in the soils. This is carbon dioxide movement from the surface of a soil. So this is out of the soil. So how much carbon dioxide is actually going from the soil pore spaces, the air spaces, out of the soil into the free air. And we can see that in this case, so this is a northern hardwood forest, I'm just looking over here, northern hardwood forest ecosystem in New York State. So we can see that March, April, May, June, not a whole lot of oxygen is being released into the atmosphere. But all of a sudden when we go to July, August, September, October, we get pretty large amounts of carbon dioxide that are being released into the atmosphere. So we can kind of track this and make some assumptions or some conclusions about when microbes are more active or they're less active, when plant roots are more active or less active, and this helps us get a handle on what's actually happening in the soil. This is changes in concentration of carbon dioxide in soil air with depth as we go down in depth into the profile of an oxisol. See this little word here, Haplust ox. When you see that ox at the end of the word, you know we're dealing with an oxisol soil order. And so we have two different seasons here: a wet season and a dry season. The the way that they look is the same. The pattern is the same. So as we go deeper into the soil, carbon dioxide gets higher. Okay? Because at the soil surface, and we're looking at centimeters here, at the soil surface we have this action of diffusion. So we're actually able to move carbon dioxide out, or move oxygen into the soil. Okay, this is still higher than it is in the air. So this level here is still higher than it is in air that's above the soil surface. But in terms of the whole soil profile, it's much lower than the whole soil profile, because we have this diffusion processes and mass flow processes that are happening to draw things out, to draw carbon dioxide out of the soil and push oxygen into the soil. Another sort of view of a profile over time. So this is going down deeper into a soil profile. This is an alpha sol in Missouri. So I'm just reading here, 50 centimeters of an alpha sol in Missouri, on which corn was grown from early May until about September. And so when we're looking at the carbon dioxide level in the soil, we will note that June 20th, all of a sudden we got a bunch of carbon dioxide that's floating around in the soil. Right? So here we have 1 to 2% or so, and then all of a sudden we come to June and we have a huge jump in percentage of carbon dioxide that's in the soil. It's still hanging around here on August 1st, and then we get kind of back to normal percentages, and then a little less than normal. So as you'll notice in the description here, that this time is really when corn is really growing gangbusters. Okay, so what we have is corn roots that are growing down in here, lots and lots of corn roots and high activity, and so these corn roots are actually exhaling carbon dioxide because they're doing lots and lots of respiration. So we have this higher amount of carbon dioxide in the soil. Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about